waving their flags and beating their drums.
We'll have more at 7 o'clock. Stay tuned. Marketplace is next.
WNYC is supported by Mount Sinai Tisch Cancer Center. At the Multiple Myeloma Center of Excellence, experts create immunotherapies personalized to patients to attack cancer cells. More information at mountsinai.org/cancer.
If you believe democracy requires a free press, your station is WNYC, 93.9 FM and AM 820, NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Marketplace is supported by Palo Alto Networks. Palo Alto Networks delivers what's next in cybersecurity innovation to protect today's digital way of life. Learn more at paloaltonetworks.com.
On the program today, the economic week that was, of course. We'll do some bank earnings too, and it's all going to be solar powered. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by VantageScore. VantageScore's credit scoring models help expand financial inclusion by leveraging predictive analytics at VantageScore.com.
In Los Angeles, I'm Kai Rizdal. It is Friday today. This one is the 13th of October. Good as always to have you along, everybody. This has obviously been a very big news week in areas not business and economic, and we are mindful of that. But there are 5 days worth of happenings in this economy to discuss, so we will. Gina Smilik is at the New York Times. Amara Mokwe is at the Wall Street Journal. Hey, you two.
Hey, Kai.
Hey, Kai.
So, Amara, let me start with you. We got some inflation readings this week, consumer prices, producer prices. They were, steady-ish. In fact, Kristen Schwab did a story for us the other day about the Groundhog Day-ification of inflation news. It all seems to be running together and generally the same. And so here's my question. Does it feel to you like we are stuck here with inflation where it is right now, despite the Fed's best efforts?
It feels like we're a little stuck. It feels like, the report, the Consumer Price Index report that came out yesterday, the response was basically like, not a bad report, but right, not as good as you would have hoped, right? And you saw a lot of economists using words like choppy and bumpy, basically sort of reinforcing this idea that, yes, the Fed has made a lot of progress in bringing inflation down from where we were last year, but, it's not necessarily going to be smooth sailing to get to target.
Target again being 2%, and we're somewhere above that. Gina, let me ask you this: Neil Kashkari, the president of the Minneapolis Fed, said this week words to the effect of, maybe the bond market is going to start doing some of the heavy lifting for the Fed, and the Fed won't have to raise again. Could you, number one, explain what he meant, and then number two, why do you think he said that?
Yeah, so we've seen a number of Fed officials come out and say, we've really seen this recent run-up in longer-term interest rates in markets. So the Fed raises short-term interest rates, but those take a lot to trickle out. We've only recently seen this big pop in the 10-year yield, which is very important to all kinds of debt, from mortgages to car loans. And so Fed officials like Kashkari are taking a look at that and saying, hey, maybe that big pop that just happened in markets is actually going to come along and sort of wall up the economy and slow it down quite a bit. And so that might mean that we have to do less, all else equal, to cool off the economy. Now, I think an important thing to note is that Kashkari wasn't really ready to sort of declare that to be the case yet. It's clearly something he's watching, but not something he's ready to commit to yet, because markets can give us and they can take us away, right? Markets move. So the move has been pretty significant, but we can't be sure that it's going to be sustained. So I think it's something they're watching. I don't think it's something they're ready to make decisions based on just yet.
Let me ask you this, though, Gina. Isn't it better? I don't know how to ask this without making the Fed look bad, but isn't it better to have the Fed in charge of the economy than the bond market in charge of the economy? Because as we've seen the last 10 days, the yields on the 10-year have been all over the place, and that implies a certain lack of control.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting here is that this is just sort of how Fed policy works. They set the short-term interest rates. They do have a policy tool that they can use to sort of guide where longer-term interest rates are. That's their quantitative easing purchases. But that's not what they're using at this stage. They're not primarily using that as an active tool of monetary policy. There is a world in which they could just try and somehow influence those longer-term rates. They're not choosing to do that. And so in the world that we actually exist in, they are to some degree at the mercy of the bond market. And so I think, maybe not ideal, but just reality at this stage.
Amara, talk to me for a second about this world that we actually live in. If you are, as we all are, a consumer in this economy, and you look at things like consumer confidence, you and your fellow consumers are getting less and less feel good about this economy. Prices are still elevated, even though the rate of inflation is coming down. What do you make of it? I mean, are you giving up the ghost and saying, I'm going to hang on to my money and put it under the mattress?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are starting to feel a little bit more anxiety. Like when I talk to people who are trying to navigate this economy and what should they buy? How should they live? They are starting to feel a little bit more anxious. And I think that's in part because people have really had to deal with these higher prices for such a long time now. And even though they hear politicians, they hear economists talking about the fact that inflation has cooled, but when they look at their lives and they look at the things that they want to buy, they're like, look, these prices are much higher than recent memory. And so I think that makes people feel a little hesitant about the outlook.
Gina, who actually, so we talked about the Fed being in charge a minute ago. Let me ask you this, though. With all the disarray amongst Republicans in the House, and it continues today, what effect does that have on this economy, do you suppose, and consumer confidence, right? You look at Congress, and Republicans in the House are a mess. What kind of confidence do you have there?
Yeah, I think it is really interesting. It's kind of early days to see how this is going to hit consumer confidence, but you could see a world where it does really affect consumers. There have been times in the past where consumers reacted really strongly to dysfunction in the government. I think around the ratings downgrade that happened with the really bad debt ceiling standoff is one example of that. And so you could see a world where consumers react to this. And that would really pile on, actually, because consumers are already starting to feel a little bit worse. In the recent readings of the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, which is one that I think we all follow pretty closely, you've seen consumers feeling a little bit less optimistic because they're feeling a little bit worse about inflation, actually. They've kind of marked up their inflation expectations a bit. And so I think if we got political dysfunction adding to all of that uncertainty that people already feel about the inflation and what we were just talking about, I think that could be a pretty potent mix.
Amara, I'm obliged to note here that we have to do government funding in something just over 30 days. I've honestly lost count, and that is a not small thing.
That's not a small thing. There's a lot of gridlock on picking this next speaker. And we talked about the run up in long-term rates. Some economists think that part of that is because of the worsening outlook on the fiscal situation, right? And so having this gridlock in Congress definitely does not help matters at all.
Yeah. Gina, can we go global here for a second? And I do want to talk briefly about the Middle East. And I want to talk about what Secretary Yellen said a number of days ago in Marrakesh. She in almost this many words, said, I don't see the current conflict as bad and as terrible as it is as a macroeconomic issue for the global outlook. What do you think of that?
I think it's probably true in the moment right now. That seems basically right. I think there's a big risk here, though. And Victoria Guida actually had a great story about this in Politico today, which is that you could really see this spilling over into oil and gas markets. You could see it. I mean, anytime there's conflict in the Middle East and anytime that Iran in particular is implicated, there's a risk that you get spillover into global energy markets. And that would be really painful at this moment. We've finally seen gas prices at the pump coming down again, that people are feeling better because of that. And so if you saw a big run up in gas again, it would make it a lot harder for the Fed to sort of, A, convince people that inflation is going to stay down on a sustainable basis, B, get inflation down on a sustainable basis, because even though they ignore gas on a day-to-day basis, it feeds into all kinds of other things like housing costs because of heating fuel and also things like airfares. And so, could be bad if that were to come to pass.
Right, if it spreads. Gina Smialek at the New York Times, Amara Mokwei at the Wall Street Journal on this Friday afternoon at the end of a long week. Thanks, you two.
Thanks, Kai.
Thanks, guys.
On Wall Street today, tech stocks were down. Oil prices, as Gina was just talking about, crude oil, Brent North Sea, up 5.7% today. They were up. We'll have the details when we do the numbers. You remember all the regional bank agita this spring? Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank collapsing in March, then First Republic going under in the beginning of May. Things in that particular slice of the financial system have largely calmed down, but as often happens when banks just a little bit lower on the food chain run into trouble, the big banks get bigger and richer. The big Wall Street banks reported profits this morning. JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, and Citigroup told investors they netted a combined $22 billion these past 3 months. Here's Marketplace's Matt Levin.
The classic way banks make money, like the way they teach it in Banking 101, rests on 3 words: net interest income.
What the bank is receiving in interest, and you subtract the interest going out.
Myra Rodriguez Valladares is managing partner at MRV Associates. Banks charge higher interest rates on mortgages or commercial loans or credit cards than the interest they pay you on your checking and savings accounts. And when the Fed hikes rates from near 0 to 5% in a little over a year, that net interest margin actually gets bigger.
Any of the new loans that they've been originating in the last 2 years, they get to charge more and more. And yet there is a lag in how much and when the banks pay a higher rate.
That lag is the biggest reason behind National Bank's profits this past quarter. The big banks know you're probably not going to leave them, even if you could get a slightly higher APY elsewhere. And even if you do, they have tons of other depositors and income streams. Smaller regional banks, though, not so much, says Xander Yoakum at CFRA Research.
So when they lose deposits, it can actually stop their ability to fund loans. So because of that, they really don't want to lose deposits, and therefore they pay a higher rate.
Yoakum says the fear-based flight out of regionals into national banks has subsided. But if you're a bank that's not too big to fail, you might be too small to be very profitable right now.
Regional banks are definitely struggling. Concern, obviously, in the office space and commercial real estate arenas.
Regional banks often specialize in commercial real estate lending, and demand for office space is still pretty weak. But while regionals will eat those losses most directly, Kairong Xiao at Columbia Business School says the big banks may not be immune.
Some of those loans going to be packaged in the commercial real estate-backed mortgage-backed securities.
And Xiao says those commercial real estate mortgage-backed securities may be on some big banks' balance sheets, waiting to be marked down. I'm Matt Levin for Marketplace.
You know what's waiting for you? If you missed something on the air, our podcast. You can subscribe or follow on the platform of your choice. You want to make progress in the climate crisis, which we all, do. There is no one solution. Decarbonizing this economy is going to mean trying a lot of different things. Among them, today, the Biden administration announcing $7 billion from the infrastructure law for 7 different hubs in 16 states to, as the White House puts it, accelerate the domestic market for low-cost clean hydrogen. Marketplace's Kimberly Adams reports on the clean energy transition from the top left corner of the periodic table.